Christianity had now been safely returned to mainland Britain. So now we'll leave the Iona of Columba and resume our journey from the past towards the present. This is a representation of the way Celtic Christianity had been restored to mainland Britain. So now we'll leave the Iona of Columba and resume our journey from the past towards the present. This is a representation of the way in which the Christian religion spread throughout the British Isles, from when it was first introduced by Joseph of Arimathea in the 1st century AD, up to the time of Columba's death just before the start of the 7th century. Until the Romans left in 410 AD, Christian groups would spring up and be killed off in the Roman purges or the Druid attacks, only to spring up again in a neighbouring community. That cycle was to continue until the Romans left and the Vikings began to attack, and in the 5th century AD the Christian communities were all driven westwards. That was the point at which the original Christian Celtic Church really took hold in Ireland. And having been kept preserved in Ireland by Patrick and Bridget, it fell to Columba to return it back to the mainland, to the north of Britain, which he did from his monastery in Iona, spreading Christianity amongst the Druidic communities, so that by the time of his death in 597, most of the northern part of Great Britain had been returned to the Celtic Christian faith. But at almost the same time, in that same year of Columba's death, something happened in exactly the same part of Britain as Hengist and Horsa had arrived, which would sow the seeds of an even greater and more long-term turmoil than the invasion of the Vikings did to the evolving Christian communities in Britain. A man called Augustine was sent by Pope Gregory in Rome, his mission being to convert Great Britain and the island of Ireland to Christianity. It has indeed been taught by many ever since that it was Augustine who brought Christianity to Britain. But good King Lucius from Winchester wrote to the Bishop of Rome in 156 AD, 450 years earlier, saying that Britain was a Christian country. And if Augustine brought Christianity to Britain, how did Patrick in Roman times? How did Bridget? How did Columba? And how did all of those other Christian communities who suffered the purges of the Romans and the attacks of the Druids for all those intervening centuries? How could they have all learnt about the Christian faith throughout the 5 centuries before Augustine arrived? The Roman Catholic Church has maintained ever since that it was Augustine who introduced Christianity to Britain, when in fact the original Celtic Christianity had been brought by Joseph of Arimathea in the 1st century AD, and thus was set up a difference of opinion between the British Church and the Roman Church that has lasted ever since. As soon as the leaders of the Celtic Church became aware of Augustine's existence and mission, they requested a meeting which turned out to be acrimonious. The Celtic priests are said to have been angry, and Augustine is said to have been arrogant. That meeting took place here in Aust, on the southern shores of the Severn Estuary, and afterwards the two churches would go their separate ways. The Celtic Church continued its work in the north, and Augustine and the monks who'd accompanied him continued to expand Christianity from Kent northwards and westwards. No further meetings were scheduled, and the differences between the teachings of the two churches remained unreconciled. These differences were characterized principally by the Celtic Church being rather more liberal inclusive and friendly towards the involvement and contributions of women, a difference of opinion about how the monks should cut their hair, is Saturday or Sunday the Sabbath, and what time should it start? And finally, the Celtic Church continued to calculate the day of Passover according to the original Jewish method, rather than adopting the new Roman way, initiated by Constantine, of using the pagan cycles of the moon to calculate what was beginning to become known in the Christian Church as Easter. Augustine himself died in 604, but not before he'd written to Pope Gregory to say that Britain was already a Christian country. With the support of a Kentish king, the southern Roman Church was by now beginning to make a halting headway in the southeast. At this point, between the Christians in the north and the Christians in the south, a particularly belligerent and forceful pagan king set out to make the most of the discord. Penda took over the Severn Valley in 628, and then defeated the powerful Northumbrian king Edwin here at the Battle of Hatfield Chase near Doncaster in 633. All that's left to remind us of a particularly bloody battle are the names of the country lanes where they disposed of the dead. By this time, Britain had become a land peopled by a series of small communities, some of them pagan, some of them Christian, each one ruled by their own little king, and the little kings would vie with each other to see who was the strongest, and the strongest would exact dues from all of the others. Penda was one of these little kings, and the high king at the time was Cadwalla. And it was Cadwalla's half-brother Edwin who was killed by Penda at the Battle of Hatfield. But in those days family ties counted for little or nothing, and Edwin's death relieved Cadwalla of having to respond to Edwin's repeated requests for a greater share of the kingdom their father Cadvan had passed on to them. Taking over from Edwin as the next king of Northumbria was the Christian Oswald, and one of the first things that Oswald did as king was to request the St. Columba community on Iona to send him a monk who would convert the people of Northumbria to Christianity, and thus came Aidan in 635 to set up the priory on Lindisfarne, Holy Island. And by the time of his death, only 16 years later in 651, Aidan had accomplished for Oswald what he had been invited to do: convert the whole of Northumbria to Christianity, and consolidate Edwin's legacy, enshrined in a Northumbrian saying of those days: "A woman with her baby might walk scatheless from sea to sea in Edwin's day." But the pagan Penda was far from finished doing battle with the Christians and their king in the neighbouring kingdom of Northumbria. He joined forces with the High King Cadwalla of Wales to fight against Oswald here at the hill fort just outside the town of Oswestry in Shropshire, and the two armies met here on the 5th of August 642 AD. The pagan forces of Penda and Cadwalla against the Christian King Oswald, who had brought Aidan from Iona to Lindisfarne. We'll let the Venerable Bede take up the story, as told in chapter 9 of his third book on the history of the English Church and people. Oswald, the most Christian king of the Northumbrians, reigned for 9 years, if we include the fatal year made abhorrent by the callous impiety of the British King Cadwalla and the insane apostasy of the English kings, for it has been generally agreed that the names of these apostates should be erased from the list of Christian kings and the year of their reign ignored. At the end of this period, Oswald fell in a fierce battle fought in the place called in English Maserfelth, or now Oswestry, against the same heathen Mercians and their heathen king, who had also slain his predecessor Edwin. He died on the 5th of August 642, when he was 38 years of age. Oswald's great devotion and faith in God was made evident by the miracles that took place after his death. For at the place where he was killed, fighting for his country against the heathen, sick men and beasts are healed to this day. Many people took away the very dust from the place where his body fell, and put it in water, from which sick folk who drank it received great benefit. This practice became so popular that as the earth was gradually removed, a pit was left in which a man could stand. But it is not to be wondered at that the sick received healing at the place of his death, for during his lifetime he never failed to provide for the sick and needy, and to give them alms and aid. Many miracles are reported to have occurred at this spot, or by means of the earth taken from it. In which case, I better take a bit for myself. That passage from Bede's writings certainly gives us something of the flavour of the attitudes and values and the belief systems that were followed in the second half of the first millennium AD.